I'm very honored and pleased to be here today and to speak to you. Also slightly intimidated by all the IT power here in the room. When I was asked to talk today, two things went through my mind. One, this really is my first UnMeeting, and so what do you actually do in a talk and an UnMeeting? I looked it up, so I'm, and the second thing, hacking. I do a lot of things. Hacking is not among them anymore, but we settled on this actually just being a metaphor, not a physical act of us hacking, even though that could have been really exciting. So I looked at the title and thought, from hacking the future of IT at NYU, what I really can talk about is hacking learning, the future of IT and higher education. And from that, I really thought, well, actually, let's just do this as an untalk. But I'm not sure how to really do that. So let's practice that together. The way I would imagine this to be an untalk is that anytime you have a question, you just, let me know, and we can talk about that. And if I get through 3 of my slides and we have the most inspired conversation about those, and the other the other 30 slides we won't get to, that's perfectly fine with me. So if that's agreeable to you, then let's pretend that's an untalk. And here's what I could talk about if we made it to the end. I want to very briefly talk about what is learning. I want to then talk about what's the future of learning, what it looks like, and then what is the role of IT in this future. And I have to warn you, as I progress in my talk, I am less certain about the things that I say. I'm starting out with things that I'm pretty sure about, and then toward the end you'll see it's a bit of speculation because I thought nothing like a good piece of speculation to set up an UnMeeting, right? Where you can tear it apart or go and support it or whatever. So let's see how that goes. What is learning? I don't want to dwell too much on it, but there's actually a lot of different definitions of learning, and depending on which one you endorse, your learning environment will look fundamentally different. We started with a behavioral view of stimulus response. Big red crosses and green check marks are what you typically get for that. Do it wrong, you have to do it over. Then we moved to a cognitive approach. We actually cared how learning was happening and what is happening in somebody's mind when they learn. And then moved on to a constructivist definition of learning, of actually thinking that we need to create our own meaning out of what we're presented with. And then to a sociocultural perspective where we realize learning doesn't happen in isolation. It happens together with others and shared. So traditionally, you're supposed to now have a classroom view of things, right? The traditional classroom, and get everybody really cheered up about the fact that they still look the same. That's kind of as close as I would come to that. But we're talking about textbooks, and I've done some research initially to look at textbooks, so there's learning with textbooks. But some of my work has also been in second language acquisition and starting to use multimedia for learners of foreign languages. All the way to scientific visualizations. This is a public lecture by Stephen Hawking on life in the universe. So we're designing experiences for the learner to engage with those kind of topics. Looked at the function of images and text comprehension. The active exploration of history. This is a project on Assyria for the Center for Online Judaic Studies, where you could actually go and do a virtual dig in a particular part of Assyria and then look at the artifacts and investigate. Computational thinking, so now we're in the realm of learning how to program when programming is not the end in itself, but it leads to an end. And lately, simulations, science exploration, this is on diffusion, surgery education or medical education in general. What can multimedia do to train those who might possibly operate on us in the future so they actually have develop those 3D skills and get a sense of when they do poll patients what they're actually looking for. This is on the stroke locator, but we're also using technology for testing. So this is a way of using MRIs for assessing learning and whether people are actually able to determine abnormal tissue. And most lately, I've been getting into the area, most recently, of games for learning, because that brings so many of the other areas together. I didn't start out as, I'm a gamer, I think games are good for learning. I started out with, I love visualizations. I love dynamic, interactive experiences. I love deep learning experiences rather than shallow, kind of give you a multiple choice item and hear your response kind of experiences. And all of that in the end, and there are a few more that we'll talk about, brought me to games. And so we've been building a bunch of games that we're testing on middle school students and for this one on geometry, this one on simple machines. And in the process of that, and that's as part of the Games for Learning Institute, we built new interfaces. This is Ken Perman's work, who's co-directing the Games for Learning Institute with me. We developed sensors to measure how people are actually responding. This is a sensor that it's a pressure sensor that you sit on. We call it the posture sensor, or students call it the butt sensor. And from that, we do try to derive how engaged you are during learning. And by doing that, we've realized that we're not operating in isolation. We're not academics in an academic setting alone that can do that, but we're actually looking at an innovation pipeline of industry, education partners, and academics. And what that looks like is that we have us as academic partners, we have education partners in the various educational settings. But then you also have corporate partners, game designers, publishers, media companies that can actually produce the kind of polished materials we need to follow work. And so we design, test, distribute, integrate, evaluate, and so on, effective games for learning. And the research that happens in that is what's so interesting to me. So that's where we are, but where's the future, right? So we want to see, can we fast forward? And thinking about what the future will hold, I like to start with what it won't hold. And so the first thing that we know for sure, that large lectures are not going to be sustainable. So we came up with a very exciting new way of doing it. Now we're videotaping large lectures. So given all the research over the past, 30 years that large lectures don't work, I'm really excited to hear if the videos of large lectures work. We also know that MOOCs are not going to be the future. I don't know how you feel. I've talked to some of you, and I know how you feel about MOOCs, but most of us were first excited by MOOCs, and then highly annoyed by MOOCs. And then what happened next was kind of really interesting. Different people reacted in different ways. I was part of the highly annoyed group relatively early, but now I'm actually really thinking that MOOCs serve the very important function, which is shake people up and realize that this is not how to do it, right? So they serve the function of showing the limitations of what we can do, showing that you can't try for mass education and expect those who traditionally don't succeed to succeed by putting them together with 100,000 other people, but not really having that one-on-one contact with the mentor. Canned lectures don't work. Simple exercises and tests don't really work. But essentially, they laid out a research agenda for us. They showed exactly what it is that we need to do. Individual tutors won't work because they're too expensive. They work very well. They're still the gold standard. People are trying to do similar work with intelligent tutoring systems, but it's not sustainable. And small classroom instruction, in the end, is only going to work for an elite view that we might be lucky to be part of, but when we think of general higher education, we need to come up with other solutions. So games also won't work in the long run, and I'm going to talk about that. So then what will it look like? I think, and I'm not alone to think that, it's going to be personalized, it's going to be adaptive, and it's going to be playful. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about. And before I go into personalized and adaptive, personalized, I think of as you as a learner stating an interest in a cultural context, a particular subject matter you're interested in, some other interest, and then the system adapts to that by showing you examples from that area that you're interested in. So it's kind of personalizing it for your own use, but the materials themselves are canned. They're pre-rendered, fabricated, etc. Versus adaptive, what you actually get changes, and so I want to talk more about that. And then the playfulness, I want to talk about that as well. If we're really lucky, we will also get settings and learning environments that are situated, meaning not isolated, taken into the classroom, removed from reality, but embedded in where it would actually be applied. So we see why we're presenting something in a certain way and why it makes sense and how it would be applied. Meaningful, thereby, is something that especially adult learners are very interested in. If you give an adult learner a particular activity, something to learn, they will first ask you, what do I need that for? What's the meaning of that? Why does that relate to me? And we're not doing a good job at that at all. And schools even less so, and higher education a little bit more so. And then the higher level thinking part that we're also craving for, but as soon as you put things into technology solution, that becomes pretty hard. So, and then those 21st century skills, collaboration, competition, communication, creativity, all of those skills that are kind of the soft skills, hard to really pin down, very hard to measure, but incredibly important, of course. So thinking about the whole idea of adaptivity, and who has been recently dealing with adaptivity in one way or another in their work? Adaptive learning? No? Maybe I should skip these. So in our field, adaptive learning is all the hype right now. Everybody wants to be adaptive. There are a number of providers out there that will tell you that they have an adaptive learning solution, which means it gives exactly to the student exactly what they need at any given time. And then you dig down and you ask, well, what does the adaptivity really look like? And that's when things get pretty challenging. If you have an intelligent tutoring system, then based on your response, it will serve up an easier or a harder problem. It will, make a larger step or a shorter step in kind of advancing learning. So you have this learning environment, and in that learning environment, we can observe the learner's performance, right? And if we then assess learning, how much or assess variables that relate to the learner, then we can look at cognitive variables. How much have you learned? How well are you able to process the material? We can look at social cultural variables. Anything related to social interactions, collaboration, to work with others. And we can look at affective variables, emotions, attitudes, identity, self-esteem, self-efficacy. And based on that, I can develop an adaptivity model to say, now that I know this about you and I just observed your performance within the system, I can modify what your experience will look like through adaptive learning, and I modify the learning environment, and it will be acting differently for you. And so to us, that's a big research agenda right now to be able to do that. And you see that big black box called assessment is actually the diagnostic part is the key part of that. Because if I cannot really measure those variables that I then use to adopt the system to the learner, it is very hard to provide the kind of information that that learner would really want. So I've been thinking a lot about that adaptivity model. If I know certain things about learners, what can I change? Well, what I change is the core learning activity, and I want to talk about this a little bit more in a moment. The part, what I'm actually doing, what in a game we would call the game mechanic, what otherwise is called the learning activity, the things that the system makes me, asks me to perform. But I can also change scaffolds, help that I get, or I can have learning feedback that I get, so the responses that I get. All of those could be adaptive. I could even have preparation of learning, where I say, you're not ready for this, you should have this for first, like a remedial approach. Or I could say, there's an intercourse progression. You have successfully completed this, you now should move on to this course or that course. So when we typically talk about adaptivity, this is never really separated. So this is the first time that I'm actually showing these slides in this kind of thinking, this model. That's where we're going right now. We're working with publishers like McGraw-Hill on this. We're working with the Gates Foundation on this. We're working with, hopefully soon, some federal funding on these kind of questions. And typically, it's rare to get this unpacked. So that's why I'm thinking so much about it. And the core learning activity is something that I think deserves even more thought. So to explode that again, what is part of the core learning activity? So the learning progression, from one problem to the next. Am I making it harder? Am I making it easier? Or the difficulty adjustment. It could be, learning progression could be a leap from some pre-algebra problem to some algebra problem, or from difficulty could be to make some parameters more difficult. But I could also look at the mode of presentation. Do I present something visually to you, verbally, in some other format that I felt works better for a particular person, a particular situation? Even all the way to emotional design. I'm going to say about this a little bit more later. But to actually recognize that people are human beings with feelings. Often we forget that when it comes to learning context and design learning. And so to me, this is an emerging adaptive learning model where if you really try to measure and assess all those different variables and build a system that responds to all of them, you would never get that. So we would have to determine what are those variables in here on the assessment, those cognitive, affective, and social cultural variables that predict learning, that influence learning the most, and measure those reliably, and then be able to adapt the system. So to me, that is the future of adaptive learning. That's the future of learning in general. And if we can solve this problem, we can actually build this kind of individualized learning that we're all fantasizing about. We're quite a ways away from that. The only solution that currently exists that solves a portion of this are intelligent tutoring systems. They mostly have cognitive variables that they assess. They deal with only the learning progression and the learning difficulty adjustment and none of the other ones. So it's a very narrow path through this model, but at least there is an existing path that shows it can potentially work. I didn't mean it, but the question was.
What are the delivery mechanisms for this kind of thing? Obviously, probably multiple, but can you talk a little bit about how you see that, those possibilities?
So I imagine something like this to happen within the larger shell of a learning management system, and within that a system often where people think of, we're back to learning objects, some kind of self-contained units that are more or less complex, where within that unit there can be some adaptivity, and then across different units there can be adaptivity. There's currently not really a technology solution that would do that. There are some people who claim to do that. Newton, if you've dealt with them, they claim to do it, but they don't tell you how, so that's always a sign for suspicion. Others have attempted individual parts, so there are some engines that, learning engines like there's a system called Serigo that will measure how much you know at any given time and then determine when they need to show you an item again to refresh your memory accordingly. But which system in the end will be used is still out in the open.
And is it always a system, or is there a stage coming back to any stage, or a collaborative get together with individuals?
Well, this is supposed to all happen in real time. So it would be hard to actually have the system itself not to be an implemented system. But I think the thinking still requires the kind of unmeeting or meeting that we're having today. Yeah.
You talked earlier about the work that you're doing, bringing games into middle schools. I don't know that much about middle school, but I have a daughter in elementary school, and she's of the age where, when she was 2, she went up to the TV and started touching it and wondered why it wasn't, a touch screen. So, she's very familiar with technology. They use technology in the classroom. But the reality is still, there are 27 kids in the class and 1 teacher. They do have a smart board. She uses the smart board all day. They have these online environments that they use, like particularly to supplement math, instruction, like they've sent websites home and she's gone on, and they're not very interesting. It's just like, it's more worksheets, only it's online instead of on paper. It hasn't been particularly inspirational for her. So I don't see this kind of potential being realized yet at that age. I wondered if you knew something about that, and if the work that you're doing in middle school, do you ultimately plan to go down further and go to elementary schools, or are you sort of thinking about, higher ed and middle school and sort of up from there?
What we're doing in Create starts on K1 and goes all the way through college level. And that depends on a number of factors. Not the least is funding, whatever funding opportunities there are. We've done Connect games for early literacy in kindergarten and first grade. My younger one is in elementary school, my older one just started middle school. So we started there. We have the math games could be elementary to middle school, and the simulations are high school. And now we're starting a new project where we're building simulations for college. I think the reason why people don't start with the really young kids is there's a lot of pushback from parents and from all the kind of associations that are worried about the well-being of young kids, and who would argue that the last thing we need is more screen time for them. And I'm not necessarily saying I'm in favor of more screen time, so which is causing a bit of a dilemma for that. I am actually in favor of saying if we do give them some screen time, then it needs to be something valuable, and I think that's what you're getting at. And I have observed the same thing with my younger one. So the field of educational technology and games for learning is one where we're still waiting for those success stories that actually shows how that's all done. We have small often research prototypes that are pretty good. But when you see what schools are doing, and so there are a number of other reasons why schools have a really hard time doing that, and how companies have a really hard time to marketing to schools. If you have ever tried to sell something to the New York City Department of Education and gone through their procurement process, you know why. There's nothing that really could happen there. You know, so there are a number of systems-related obstacles in the way of actually having this work. But for us, the research is very interesting on all of those levels, and the games we develop happen on all of those levels. But the adaptivity model is especially important exactly for this reason. So you have a teacher with 30 students in front of them. That teacher will not be able to deliver the personalized and adaptive and individualized kind of instruction that you would want to deliver to a person. And, so what if they could give one group, either the very strong students or the students who have fallen behind for some reason, a learning system like this, and then focus on the other group, and then at some point switch, right? So that's the idea. So just a brief side note, because I said no games, right? And why did I say that? Because games are really exciting. We have games as highly contextualized, situated problem-solving spaces, exactly what we're talking about. If anybody is playing games, you should recognize at least one of them. And if you're not playing games, this is Portal 2. First homework assignment. Because after all, you have to play Portal 2. There are several others, Ratchet and Clank and Little Big Planet, that you may want to play, but Portal 2 is just too awesome. Games also allow for this individualized learning, for customization. What I'm talking about is personalization. Games are already doing that and have been doing that for a long time, so we can learn a lot from games about that. Games connect in-school and out-of-school work. When my son comes home, my 9-year-old, and says, I have homework. I said, why are you so happy about homework? It's a game. And then I look at what he's doing, and it's the lamest game ever, but it is so much better than the worksheets he typically gets, right? So often people ask us, how can you ever compete with Grand Theft Auto or any of those AAA titles? And that's not our comparison. That's not who we're competing against. We're competing against the textbooks and the worksheets and the other boring things that they're getting. But games also are in a entering into an emotional space and getting you into an emotional space where where many games, that's the primary engagement with the game is on an emotional level. And we're not doing that well at all with other learning materials. So there's a lot of things to be said. We have embedded assessment in games for learning and learner variables. And we know that they have a community of practice as a result if done right, and a participatory learning culture where everybody in their way can contribute to the learning and participate in the learning process. So why am I saying not games? Because I'm proposing an alternative model for that. We have done research on computational thinking. We have done research on augmented reality games for science learning, on those math games, on transformation type of games, geometry concepts. This is flagella, estimation of percentages in shapes that are not regular shapes. I'm proposing to move away from games and to move to playful learning instead, which removes a number of obstacles. One is there's a lot of preconceived notions about games. People will say, oh, when I go to Germany, I just get back from Germany, when I present in German to my colleagues, I get questions like, well, but at some point they need to go from the games to actual learning, and then it's going to be hard. And why would they want to do that if they've learned with games all this time? And so my response is, well, at least we got them to this point. When you go to New York City public schools, you see that people are disengaged. People are not actually following the materials. People are not interested in the materials. So we get them to this point. So different cultures have different attitudes toward games, and I'm frankly not so interested anymore in convincing people that games are a good idea. But there's almost nobody who would say playfulness isn't a good idea. And playfulness means I don't have to make a full-blown game. I just have to make a task that's rather boring and somber, a little playful, a little cheerful, adding some of the elements that games do, and maybe not all the others. So we've developed this playful learning model, and when you think about playful learning, we talk about learner engagement. We talk about engaging learners in ways that results in better learning. And again, engagement is this empty term where nobody really knows what we're talking about. So we've come up with this model of engagement where cognitive engagement is really what you're after. Thinking about the subject matter, processing deeply what you're learning. But that's exactly the problem. If I ask students to do that in the class, some will and some will not, and that depends on a number of factors. So how do I get people to engage? Well, here's one way. Using social cultural engagement. We had a game where we compared competitive versus collaborative versus individual play. And we found the two versions of the game that were with or against other people were far more interesting than one and engaging than the one played by yourself. But there's also affective engagement, the emotions I was talking about. I design games in a way that they induce positive emotions in the learner. We know that broadens your cognitive resources. We know that enhances learning. That's part of our own research. And then, of course, physical engagement. You have the Microsoft Kinect. You have the PS4 with the camera now. So you can use gestural input rather than a controller, and you have physical input. You can play games, and the Kinect picks it up. And so we have that as a form of engagement as well. So the challenge then is to say, if I want to get to cognitive engagement, I can go via the affective route through emotion. I can use the social route via collaboration or competition. I can use the physical route via doing something, giving people a sword and then fighting those algebraic equations. All more engaging in some ways and playful, but it doesn't have to be a full-blown game, right? So that's why I believe that we can actually move from the whole idea of games and learning to playful learning, and will solve a lot of conceptual and other problems. The way this is done is by using all the game design features that we typically use, the incentive system, the stars, the points, and so on, where you get the learning mechanics, the assessment mechanics, in other words, the things in the game that either help you learn or assess your learning. The aesthetic design, the narrative, big part of that, and of course the musical score, all the things that we do. But if it's playful learning, I might say, I don't need a musical score, I don't need a narrative, but I'm going to use really good aesthetic design. That's part of our research. We have actually shown that that works very well for inducing positive emotions and enhancing learning. There are lots of theoretical foundations underpinning this, and those are the ones that we're concerned with in our research. So we're looking at the social, cognitive, and affective foundations for those learning design elements that then result in these kind of engagement forms of playful learning. So that's essentially a research agenda as we're pursuing it in my lab and with my colleagues. And virtually any study that we've been doing in the past could be put into that.
How far do you take the addictive nature of games into this process?
The first part was about
Games are inherently designed to be addictive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the dangerous part about playful learning.
Right.
You create a process that's too attractive, and the learning process becomes more important.
So that's pretty much a very nice summary of why we move away from games for learning to playful learning. When Zynga in Facebook and Farmville makes you buy all different kind of things to move on, when other in-app purchases seem so necessary all of a sudden because the games have put you in a situation by often tapping into very basic psychological needs that we have. When that happens, then the game part has won over the content part. And in Zynga's case, it was just about making money. In games for learning, we would love if the learners were more addicted to our games, but it becomes very, very hard when the content is learning, when it's actually thinking that's involved. And so for games for learning, again, we're more thinking about playful learning, adding some of those elements, but really focusing on the learning task. And my favorite way of making the learning task, making the game engaging, addictive, is by having the learning task itself be addictive, not the stars, not the points, not all the extraneous things, but the learning task itself. If that were the case, it could be as addictive as we want it to be, right? Because then you're actually benefiting from it. But if you get derailed to the game-like features, then, or game features, then you don't get that benefit. I was just given the sign that I should move on to the good stuff. So, where's my good stuff? I had a couple of slides on the research that we've done that I more or less summarized. But I did want to talk about what is the future of IT in facilitating all of this learning that I was just talking about in higher education? And so, remember when I said that I'm getting from the things I know to the things that I believe or speculate? So we're not in the speculation phase. So there are many possible futures. That's my disclaimer. And I believe that we're soon going to reach a point where the technological solutions for what we want to implement learning-wise will have been solved. And where we don't need any new technology tools, we will have the designing of learning entirely be an instructional design task, meaning translating what we know about learning into one of the many technological solutions that exists. When you look at all the startups, when you look at all the tools that are available, we are now at a point where what we could be doing technologically far exceeds what we can conceptualize learning-wise because we're so locked into the old paradigms. So we need to, it's the same thing when stage plays moved to movies and TV. Initially they had a fixed camera pointed at a stage and they filmed the play, right? And then somebody said, what if we had two cameras? And then somebody said, what if we moved the camera? And then somebody said, what if we went on location off the stage? And so it became its own genre, and we're in any kind of technology-based learning, we're still struggling with that. We're still putting lectures, videotaping them and putting them online. Now, for certain things, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is something that should remind us that we need a paradigm shift. We need to think about what the capabilities are of the technology and how we can reconceptualize learning rather than replicate what we've been doing, but in many ways we know hasn't worked. More services will go the way of email outsourcing. There will be another Google or another site where we as IT providers at the university will say, costs too much money, too much maintenance that's necessary. I wasn't a big fan. So far I haven't found another reason to complain about it other than I think that my IP should really stay internally, but I believe there's a contract that covers that. But so I think we'll see that with other services as well. And then what we will be doing is we will look at custom media design, which is what several of you are already doing. We will be doing instructional consultation and design support, helping the faculty think this through and helping them understand the tools that are available. This kind of, I have a colleague who says, I don't like technology for my classes at all. And then it turns out he's going abroad, he's using all the kind of technology tools to communicate with the students, but he doesn't think of it as technology, right? And so if it disappears and the consultation is all about, here are things that make your life easier and that help you as a professor either realize your vision or help you even think through what more you could do. That's the kind of level of support. And then, of course, system integration, all the things that connect the systems internally to possible outsourced solutions. I suppose that's going to stay. So my summary is learning will be more playful, adaptive, personalized, but the IT problems in the sense of the technological tools will be solved relatively soon, or are in many cases already. Now, that doesn't mean that small increments can be done. But people are working on AR and VR solutions, Oculus Rift type of things. Those all exist. The innovation has been done. It also, I'm not saying that there won't be any innovation, but we're far behind with our learning models compared to what we can do already. So I just want to list a couple of projects that we're doing and create. It's a broad range, all kind of tapping into the things that I've just talked about. We release, in case you and your soon middle schoolers are interested, we release all of our games in our platform that we call the Dream platform, because one needs to have a dream. And so the Dream platform is this tool where all of our games are available for free to play. And those are my collaborators. When I say we, I actually mean we. And this is the way how you can learn more about over. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to a great meeting after what unfortunately turned out to be me more talking than
we have time for very quick, maybe 2 questions, and then because it's an unmeeting, you create the agenda, Dr. Plas is going to stay for just a little bit, we could actually have a session where Q&A with Dr. Plas or something like that. So don't feel like you need to get them all in. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, question. So how do you see the role of the subject matter expert changing, right? Traditionally, the professor stands in the front, blah, 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 blah. We soak it up, done. How's that going to change?
Well, that's a really interesting question because those people are changing, right? I mean, those of you who work with subject matter experts, with professors, know that depending on the experience of this person, which in some cases relates to age, but not always, the training they got, depending on the experience, either you have to tell them or they will tell you what they want, right? And so I think that's never really going to change. But I think the expertise, what tools are available, and then ideas of how they can be used in various areas, in my opinion, require instructional consultants on the IT side, on the university side, who are also trained in the subject matter area, who then can talk to the faculty member in ways where it's actually an exchange of back and forth of subject matter plus the integration of the use of technology tools for that. So we've had first conversations. My program is the program that trains instructional designers and visual media designers for learning to actually see if there's more of a connection we can have to those among you who do that, and where we can kind of create an affinity group that benefits from each other's experience. But it's going to continue to be a moving target, is what I think.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a